all the legislation they wanted to bring up, they brought it up and gotten it out of the way, and now they bring up you. And now they bring up you. You put them first and they put you last. Because you're a chum. A political chump.
Political chumps. Yo, Khalid. Political chumps always clapping at lectures, won't take notes. Can't speak on what they know, they just quote. Civil rights lawyers won't tell blacks the truth or the difference between in for life or civil lit or mortus. Impropria persona, it's 2014. Blacks act like their brains on morphine. Think less, do little law studies. My more buddies wanna write a book for law dummies. Cause they don't get it like teaching caveman rocket science. Politicians rule minorities within your pocket science. Pulling out dollars to give to those in white collars. Salivating, waiting for your green up collards. Calling themselves poor, but they spending millions and billions on everything but their own children. He was a good boy to mom on the couch living, but a heartless criminal and known villain. Political chump, treated like a political skunk, marching and picketing for civil-political junk. Wars of the crown, states they break, but won't respect nationality or their prophet's face. Not talking Muhammad, Yahshua or Buddha, but the Sharif they call Sheriff the Law Tutor. Founded a civic organization to build a nation, eradicating what the blacks were facing. Segregation, Jim Crow laws, enter through back doors and led on. They using rope as weapons. Cause I slipped and touched a cave bitch wrist. They bomb my town and label me a rapist. I wasn't a secret, everybody saw. But to my people, they never kill crackers but fighting their wars. To kill innocent people that did nothing to them, and only cuss out the ones that did something to them. Distract you from your nation with false fear. Some black leaders are paid sellouts and some face crosshairs for speaking of things when they took an oath not to speak, giving you clues like promised lands and mountain peaks. Political champions, proud of championship belts. Political abuse against druids and celts, thinking that state ID makes you a citizen. Conscious Moors talk, unconscious Moors aren't listening. Thinking they can have rights or get rights or earn rights when rights are exercised by those that live on earth, right? And rights come from human rights and human rights from birthrights. Have none and end up facing US Third Reich.
Have begun to outline, but especially in relationship to this month, when we pay tribute to a king And so much of the energy of the civil rights movement evolving in this particular week in conversation. Of course, the actions yesterday of Rudolph, as Reverend Sharpton called him, Wallace Giuliani, certainly brings back to light the kind of struggle that our brothers and sisters had during the 1950s and 60s. Attorney Maddox, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Hotep. Glad to see you.
Brother, good to have you with us this morning as well.
Thank
you. In terms of this point, and let's maybe start off on this with the King movement, it is sometimes lost on people that when Dr. King and the civil rights movement were engaging in their various actions, that they certainly weren't doing it for publicity, we know, and they certainly weren't doing it on the basis of simply having a drink of water, so to speak, or being able to eat in a restaurant. There were laws involved. There was an attempt to change the legal structure. And I'd like to have you talk for a few moments about your own view of, in retrospect now, what those particular changes, legally speaking, have really meant to us at this point in time, because the Republicans seem committed to turning back the clock on some of those changes. So what did occur legally that is so upsetting to some in other communities?
Well, I think really it's not really a question of what really occurred. I think the real question is really the different philosophies that different men and women possess concerning the law. And I think that as we look at our current condition, what is missing is a philosophical basis. And that even when we act, we do not act from a philosophical basis. In many instances, emotions, other instances, it's rhetoric. But there's no philosophical basis. When you go to Dr. King, the first thing that has to be noted about him is that he was a philosopher.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with. And this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington, in this campaign, we are coming to get our check. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. In exile in his own land. In his own land.
That's true.
First and foremost, and he acted pursuant to his philosophy. And in many instances, the goals of his philosophy was changing because he was a changing person, as anybody would be who has not sold out. It's always an evolutionary process to any people of that nature. But the real struggle, and this is the debate that actually exists beyond all philosophers, and maybe to some extent to jurists and those who are in the legal profession, would be the question of the separation of the integration of morality with laws.
Okay.
And if you look at, for example, someone like a Rudolph Giuliani, he has a particular name. He operates pursuant to a particular theory, and that is one of positive law. And in very simple terms, that means the separation of morality from law, in which a sovereign enunciate and promulgate certain laws without any real direction from morality itself. And then you have, on the other hand, those who are naturalists or who advocate natural law. And they see man in a universal creative scheme of the Creator, and that the aim of man law is to carry out that scheme of the Creator toward the universe. And so with them, while they will give deference to human law or man-made law, they will only give deference to it if it satisfies their conscience as to what is right or wrong.
So we get Dr. King saying that one has to fight against unjust laws on the moral basis and philosophical basis you just described.
Right. And then, for example, let's say in the case of, in many jurisdictions, for example, there was a law that said that if you see a felon fleeing, you have a right to shoot that person down. And that went to U.S. Supreme Court, and it was reversed on some other grounds, but not that the United States Supreme Court advocates natural law, because it doesn't. But, there are some things that are so absurd. But within the jurisdiction of Tennessee, for example, where this law arose, if Dr. King had been a police officer in Tennessee, then he could not have carried out that provision, even though that was the law in Tennessee, because that would not have squared with his conscience.
I see.
You see, while on the other hand, there are people who believe that morality only impedes law and undermines it, and that people have a responsibility to obey all laws because they have been enunciated by a sovereign of men that have been delegated that authority from the people. And that is the situation with Rudolph Giuliani, who, believes in that concept. The danger of it is that Adolf Hitler also believed in that same theological and philosophical basis.
It sounds exactly like that. Let's take a break. You've set a fantastic foundation for us. We'll come right back.
But, in fact, Mr. Brown and I this came up because of the conversation Mr. Brown and I had earlier. But it really goes back to the point that you make when you want to talk about Yahweh being Yahweh.
Yeah.
And I have a particular theory of that, in which actually I somewhat expanded that with Mr. Brown, because he called me one day and he was saying that we are a nation within a nation.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, that's true, but it's more than that.
Okay.
And I point out, though, that giving deference to that concept, that had been not initially, I don't know whether initially not stated, but in the book, The Condition by Martin Delaney, he stated that, which is about 150 years ago, that we were a nation in a nation.
Hold on one second.
In a nation within a nation. The United States is also incorrectly called that. It should be called the United Nations of America. Because what you really have in this country are nations operating under the umbrella of America.
Okay.
So in other words, for example, the truest example of that would be the whole tribal sovereignty of
I knew you were going to
indigenous
say
people.
that. I knew you were going to say that.
All right.
Okay.
You see, that would be the truest example.
I got
so
you.
You start from that.
Right.
I mean,
Okay.
That can't be denied.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
But then once you proceed from that, knowing that if they were given certain sovereignty rights, that people like the Mormons would also have to be given certain sovereignty rights. That the Catholic Church is already a sovereign. With its headquarters in Vatican City, recognized by more than 100 other nations as a political entity. That the Hasidim in Brooklyn is also another nation, and that these nations are operating under the umbrella. So America is more than that. So therefore, it's interesting that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, "This is the nation of Islam," and Yahweh being Yahweh said, "This is the nation of Yahweh." You see, implicit in that, it must have been that understanding that this was a country that allowed for nations to assemble under its umbrella.
Very deep.
You see, and so therefore you go into the whole issue of sovereignty.
Absolutely. I understand.
Right,
Yes.
you come out, of that. So
Yeah.
it's a very interesting discussion.
Let's bring it in.
Right. It's interesting that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, "This is the nation of Islam," and Yahweh being Yahweh said, "This is the nation of Yahweh." You see, implicit in that, it must have been their understanding that this was a country that allowed for nations to assemble under its umbrella.
Very deep.
You see, and so therefore you go into the whole issue of sovereignty.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand.
Right, you know,
yes.
you come out, you know, of that. So
yeah.
It's a very interesting discussion.
Let's
you know.
bring it in.
Right. You know, it's interesting that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said this is the nation of Islam. And Yahweh ben Yahweh said this is the nation of Yahweh. You see, implicit in that, it must have been their understanding that this was a country that allowed for nations to assemble under its umbrella.
Very deep.
You see, and so therefore you go into the whole issue of sovereignty.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand.
Right, you know,
yes.
you come out, you know, of that. So
yeah.
It's a very interesting discussion.
Let's
you know.
bring it in.
Right. You know.
We are a nation within a nation in this country searching for a nationality. And once we find our nationality and serve that nationality, we'll do for ourselves what needs to be done. All ethnic groups in this country understand they got a nationality. Because you answer to such stupid words like Negro and color and black. You have no nationality. Negro is not a nationality. Some lazy Portuguese or Spaniard took an adjective and made a noun out of it. Colored is not a nationality. Black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are.
Right.
The name of a people must relate them instantaneously to land, history, and culture. And anytime you call a people by their right name, anytime you call a people, name a people, and fail to relate them back to land, history, and culture, you have called them out of their name. There's no black land or black holder. There's nothing wrong with the word black. Nothing wrong with it at all. Only it doesn't relate to a country. The name of every people in the world relate to country. And once you think instantaneously of land, you think of nationality. You belong to something big in the world.
Bring it in.
Right.
Yeah, let's bring it in. Because it's interesting that you mentioned this because this sovereignty issue is the issue of this patriot movement.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
That ties into the Republican thrust that they're doing.
But going back to that, though, when the Black Panther said power to the people, that's what they were talking about, popular sovereignty.
We work with anybody and form coalition with anybody that has revolution on their mind. We're not a racist organization because we understand that racism is an excuse used for capitalism. And we know that racism is it's a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people. And we're going to have to put it back in the hands of the people. All power to the people. That's saying that no matter what color you are, there's only two classes. And that's saying there's a class over here and there's a class over there. And the reason that this class over here has never did anything to get this class off its back because this is lower, this is upper. This is the oppressed, this is the oppressor. This is the exploited, this is the exploiter. And these people in this class have divided themselves. They say, I'm black and I hate white people. I'm white and I hate black people. I'm Latin American and I hate hillbillies. I'm hillbilly and I hate Indians. So we fighting amongst each other. We know they have our pictures, we know they're looking for us, we know they want us, but we're still saying that even though we could be in a sense, as far as this system goes, on the mountaintop, we in the Black Panther Party, because of our dedication and understanding what's in the valley, knowing that the people in the valley, knowing that we originally came from the valley, knowing that our flag is the same flag as the people in the valley, knowing that our enemy is on the mountaintop, our friends are in the valley, we say even though it's nice to be on the mountaintop, we're going back to the valley. I be in the office every day. I be in the the streets propagandizing every day. I'll be working with everybody every day. I'll be teaching that solidarity is the thing. The end of a complete wipe out of imperialism is the thing. So if you're going to be thinking about me, that's what Bobby would be teaching. If you're going to be thinking about us, all we say is ain't no thing about going nowhere, getting killed. All we want to know is that you're doing what we'd be doing if we were here. And you got to do that. You can't do it unless you believe that you can do it. Now, we say all power to all people. We say white power to white people. Brown power to brown people. Yellow power to yellow people. Black power to black people. X power to those that we left out. We say Panther power to the Vanguard Party. When you leave here, you hear saying the last words, before you go to bed tonight, say I am a revolutionary. Make that the last word. In case you don't wake up, then somebody might believe it and you might, end up in what they call a revolutionary happy hunting grounds. Say that I am a revolutionary. Thing. The people have to pay the price for peace. If you dare to struggle, you dare to win. If you dare not to struggle, then goddamn it, you don't deserve to win. Let me say peace to you if you're willing to fight for it. Let me say it in the spirit of liberation. I've been gone for a little while. At least my body's been gone. You ain't got to repeat after me. At least my body's been gone for a little while. But I'm back now, and I believe that I'm back to stay. I believe that I'm going to do my job, and I believe that I was born not to die in a car wreck. I don't believe I'm going to die in a car wreck. I don't believe I'm going to die from slipping on a piece of ice. I don't believe I'm going to die because I got a bad heart. I don't believe I'm going to die because of lung cancer. I believe that I'm going to be able to die in the thing that I was born for. I believe that I'm going to be able to die high off the people. I believe that I will be able to die as a revolutionary in the international revolutionary proletarian struggle. And I hope that each one of you will be able to die in the international proletarian revolutionary struggle, or you didn't be able to live in it. And I think that struggle is going to come. Why don't you live for the people? Why don't you struggle for the people? Why don't you die for the people?
And it's everybody who has used sovereignty in some form of them had to be eliminated, especially they were black, because the one nation you can't have in America is a black nation.
You can't just say me I'm black. That means you're dead. Legally. I'm a black minority. I'm a person that's a black minority. Either way you go, you're locking yourself into some stuff you don't need to be in.
See, you have all these other nations, but you can't have a black nation.
I see exactly.
Because a black nation would be antagonistic to the scheme of things out of their own historical experience.
Absolutely.
Black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are.
That's right.
There's no black man or black holder. There's nothing wrong with the word black. Nothing wrong with it at all. Only it doesn't relate to a country.
And even look at the population.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Who has any population?
Right.
Spread and comparable to our population.
Right.
Oh,
right.
No.
Right.
You're right. That's impossible.
That's impossible.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting about what you're saying concerning Dr. King that occurs to me. I remember, and I read this the other day, reviewing Dr. King's life. At one point when he was being introduced at the March on Washington, that they referred to him as the president of the Negroes of America.
Right.
Somebody referred to him as this. Right. And when they said it, I said, that's right at the edge.
Right.
And what you said about him being taken out?
Right. There you go. You got it.
Yeah.
I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments, and I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism. And I think the realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go, and that we are involved in a war on Asian soil, which, if not checked and stopped, can poison the very soul of our nation. I'm not going to say that all of our problems will be solved if the war in Vietnam is ended, but I do say that the war makes it infinitely more difficult to deal with these problems. When a nation becomes obsessed with the guns of war, it loses its social perspective, and programs of social uplift suffer. This is just a fact of history, so that we do face many more difficulties as a result of the war. It's much more difficult to really arouse a conscience during a time of war. There is something about a war like this that makes people insensitive. It dulls the conscience. It strengthens the forces of reaction, and it brings into being bitterness and hatred and violence. I think the biggest problem now is that we got our gains over the last 12 years at bargain rate, so to speak. Didn't cost the nation anything. In fact, it helped the economic side of the nation to integrate lunch counters and public accommodations. It didn't cost the nation anything to get the right to vote established. And now we are confronting issues that cannot be solved without costing the nation billions of dollars. Now, I think this is where we're getting our greatest resistance. They may put it on many other things, but we can't get rid of slums and poverty without it costing the nation something. I feel that nonviolence is really the only way that we can follow, because violence is just so self-defeating. A riot ends up creating many more problems for the Negro community than it solves. You can, through violence, burn down a building, but you can't establish justice. You can murder a murderer, but you can't murder through violence. You can murder a hater, but you can't murder hate. And what we are trying to get rid of is hate and injustice and all of these other things that continue the long night of man's inhumanity to man.
Whole fear.
Yeah.
You see, that he would, at one point, acknowledge that. Because, see, the other thing about it is, and I brought this here, the Declaration of Independence. See, this was a document that he believed in, but he was to the point where Jefferson was when he wrote it. You know, when he said...
Hold on, we got to get this one here. We're back with you inside of the GBE Radio Magazine at WLIB 1190 AM. Well, you've often heard me mention the fact that when I do this particular show, there are a lot of different perks that come with the show. I mean, of course, I get free cakes and pastries and cookies and all those kind of things. But one of the major perks that I get in the show is that I get a chance to talk to the guests during the break while the commercials are going on. And let me the Daily Challenge. It was called The Case of the Century, Yahweh Ben Yahweh's federal appeal being dismissed. This is Georgia's 11th Circuit Court of Appeals that rejected religious leader Yahweh Ben Yahweh's request for his 1992 conspiracy conviction to be overturned. Reportedly, the court affirmed the convictions of the Nation of Yahweh leader and 6 of his followers with little or no comment on January 5th. Now, Attorney Maddox, this fits into our conversation in some ways. I thought it would fit, but not as deeply as you've described it. And I'd like you to talk about it.
Culture, language, name, land, and God, and destiny, and place on the planet Earth. Without that knowledge, our so-called black people have gone through so many metamorphoses, they don't know what they are, butterfly or not. Poor things, you come up being colored, and then I ask, well, where's colored land? What is your colored name? And do you speak Colourese? And see, they just didn't have an answer for that. What's your colored culture and your colored history? Where on the map can I go to colored land? And so they said, well, I guess maybe we're not colored. So they became Negroes. I asked the same question. Where's Negro land? You have a Negro name? Do you speak Negroese? He said, no, sir. I said, well, sir, what's your nationality then? Being intellectually honest, I can't say Negro. So then my people became black. I'm black and I'm proud. Black and I'm proud. I said, you proud, huh? Okay. Where on the map is black land? Do you speak Blackese? Do you have a black name? What land do you own after your black self? See, if I ask Japanese that question, they say, I own Japan, I speak Japanese. My name is Kawasaki, Nissan, and Toyota. I like that. Don't you like that? Then my people became Afro-American. That's the latest thing. African-American. I'm from Africa. Where? Where in Africa are you from? Do you speak African? Who in Africa speaks African? Nobody.
Well, actually, it really, this particular conversation really rose in a conversation that Minister Brown and I had on an earlier occasion. When Minister Brown, in this conversation, referred to black people in this country as a nation within a nation. And I agree with that, but I informed him, but it was actually deeper than that. One, you have to agree with it because this was an assessment that Martin Delaney made in his book in about 1850 or so, called The Condition, where he actually described us as a nation within a nation. So we've heard this repeatedly by a lot of people, that we are a nation within a nation. Well, he was certainly one of the earlier proponents of that notion, and he derived that from the notion that we were unable to gain any political equality within this country, and therefore nobody fit that description more than our people. But what I told Mr. Brown at that point was that it would be fatal if we left it at only we were a nation within a nation. We also must recognize that the United States of America is a misnomer because in effect it is really the United Nations of America. That this particular country from its beginning recognized the fact that nations could coexist, not just states out of 13 colonies, but nations. And the first recognition of that, that nobody can disagree with, is the fact that the indigenous people were given certain tribal sovereignties.
Because of all the thousands of people that I've met over my years, conversations with people that look like African American people, and when you really get down to the nit and the grit of it and ask them, what's your ancestry? Oh, my grandma was a Cherokee, or my great-great-grandfather was, I think he was a Seminole. And because of the stolen heritage of American Indians with black blood and black people with Indian blood, I felt that it was time that black folks with Indian blood and Indian folks with black blood were able to come together as a people and not feel ridiculed, marginalized, or subjugated because they stood up and told the world who they are.
Through treaties and things of that nature. You don't enter into treaties with people who are part of you. Treaties are entered in between two states, so to speak, in terms of international law. And so therefore, we know that the fact that the indigenous people were able to have some semblance of sovereignty, even though that's questionable, you know, in terms of how they've been able to enjoy it. But we do know that. I mean, even up to the present time, the fact that gambling takes place on their grounds, out of tribal sovereignty, the fact that there have been many whites who have been employed by these gambling casinos who've sued on civil rights grounds and have been told that they had no suits because these were tribal sovereignties in that nature. So we know
they are literally in another country, so to speak,
right, so
when they're there on the reservation.
Right, and so that extension really also applies to a lot of other people, like the Mormons is a nation within a nation. The Catholic Church is already recognized as one of the political entities because of its status in Vatican City as a nation, its membership in the UN and other, and its diplomatic immunity that it enjoys. And then you have the Mormon Church that is also a sovereignty until itself out in Utah. So these sovereignties really exist under one umbrella. Now, what is interesting is, and a lot of people didn't necessarily comment on this, why did the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, for example, call it the Nation of Islam? You see, and in my opinion, he had to recognize the fact of him forming a theocracy and a government that may not necessarily be able to function ultimately within the confines of the United Nations of America, and therefore 5 separate states were demanded, but a government nonetheless. And then you had Yahweh ben Yahweh, who came and formed the Nation of Yahweh, also a recognition of the development of a government for black people. Now, the problem is that while other people have been able to enjoy this nationhood status in America, whites find it inconceivable for there to be a black nation, I mean, in this country. And therefore, people who have recognized the concept of sovereignty, going back to the Honorable Marcus Garvey, who recognized that even though he called it UNIA, but he was building a government nonetheless. And then the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who was in prison, and then the Yahweh ben Yahweh, who is now in prison. And then you go even to the Black Panther Party, because when the Black Panther Party talks about power to the people, they're actually talking about popular sovereignty, you see, which is a concept that has been fought over for the last 200 years. George Wallace was shot because of his notion of sovereignty. You see, the right of the people of a territory, Alabama, to be the ultimate arbiters of how black folks are treated. That was his notion.
I'm glad you mentioned this because I wanted to hear your comments about this federal versus state dynamic which you're bringing in now. Stretch that to other states in the South and give us some sense of what those states were saying, for example, in the quote-unquote civil rights era about their sovereignty.
Yeah, well, you know, actually, going back really to the Civil War itself, the Civil War was fought over sovereignty because you actually had two nations coexisting at the same time. You had the nations of the South and you had the North, because they had two different cultures. One was an agricultural economy, the one was an industrial economy. And there was a whole question of who would regulate the other. They were seen as a different, two accents. They were seen as two different nations. So the war was not fought over slavery. As a matter of fact, the Union could not have been fighting over slavery, because at the time they was conducting the war, the U.S. Constitution sanctioned slavery. So you couldn't be fighting something that your Constitution already sanctioned. So it really has something to do with the whole question of sovereignty and how men conduct their affairs. Now, sovereignty also really, when you're talking about sovereignty to some extent, you can't forget the indigenous people, because much of what this country learned in terms of the natural rights of man came from the indigenous people, because they had no model in Europe, because there were monarchies in Europe and everybody was a subject.
What do you mean when you say the natural rights of man?
Well, basically, when the Europeans came here and they began to see the political institutions of the indigenous people, what they recognized was that those institutions was not coercive. I mean, you did not have magistrates and judges, you did not have jails and prisons and things of that nature. And it was a respect for every person's right. You didn't have poverty, you didn't have a clash over property or any of those things. You had total enjoyment of people. The European had come from a land where there was a lot of poverty, a lot of famine, a lot of starvation, a lot of those things. So they began to admire that, but they had no model themselves in terms of it. And so they used that model of the indigenous people in terms of recognizing that every man has rights that are endowed to him, and that those rights continue to exist until that man believes that it is more important that some of those rights are granted to a trustee, so to speak, in trust to protect the common good of all people. You know what I mean? It's like if we playing basketball, you playing basketball, we can play basketball, but at some point we say, hey man, we may do this better, we had a referee. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah,
so,
I see.
it doesn't start with playing basketball, but we get a right to make decisions on whether we foul to somebody else other than us.
I see.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But we have certain rights within ourselves, all right? Well, it was that basis from which the Declaration of Independence was written.
Hold on to that point, and I know that you have some thoughts about Dr. King and his perspective on this document as well. We'll come back. Attorney Alton Maddox is with us in the GBE. I see some of your telephone calls beginning to come in. You know how the format works. You're right. You can join the conversation at 212-889-1190. 212-889-1190. Attorney Alton Maddox. Our theme is Understanding Your Power Under the Law, a tribute to a king. The GBE Radio Magazine continues right after news coming up. I'm messing with this now.
Right.
I hear exactly what they're doing.
Right.
Seriously.
Right. Yeah, real serious.
I read something the other day that was wild. They were saying that in one of the states out west, don't remember if it was Nevada, Iowa, one of those states out there, they were saying that IRS agents don't even bring jury trials in this particular state because the state population is so conscious of sovereignty that they can't win the cases.
Yeah, well, you see, also, there's another reason for that, too.
Tell me.
You see,
Hold on.
the Hayes Tilden Compromise. Well, you see, it was around that time that there was an act called the Posse Comitatus Act of 1875. And what it did was, and it was enacted because it was to prevent standing armies in the South. Okay? Because you see, even going back to the formation of the U.S. Constitution, there was always a fear of a standing army, and the dangers that it posed to a free people.
Right.
All right. So then when you had the military intervention in the South got Congress to pass the Posse Comitatus Act of 1875, which made the sheriff the highest ranking official in the county. You see, and so therefore, when a federal agent comes into that county, they're coming in illegally. So now, what these militiamen have done is going back to that particular act, you see, and said, hey, this is it. Because, see, when the compromise was given in 1877 for Hayes, to become president, well, what happened is that the parties agreed at that time that they would not pass any more civil rights acts. And they didn't until 1957.
Okay.
All right? And that there would be no further federal intervention into the affairs of the states. And that didn't happen again until 1957 when he sent the troops into Arkansas.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
See,
I do. And then we have a misnomer on our behalf as a people that civil rights acts are occurring in the late 50s and early 60s.
Right.
And we can go back 100 years before that and find civil rights acts.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because see, with the Act of 1866 and then the Act of 1875, the Act of 1866 allowed for people to enter the contracts and to buy property. Then the Act of 1875 was the Public Accommodations Act. It was ruled unconstitutional. And once that act was, around the time that act was ruled unconstitutional, then Tennessee became the first state to enact Jim Crow law. And then they started boomeranging. And then you got to a case called Plessy versus Ferguson, which dealt with that, in terms of public transportation.
Yeah, now that's an interesting thing. Jim Crow laws.
Right.
Because it's not just a Jim Crow attitude.
Right, yeah.
It's not just a Jim Crow philosophy.
Right, yeah.
It's a Jim Crow law.
Right. And see, what happened was, there was a guy by the name of Rice, a white guy in Cincinnati, who, I think it was Dan Rice, who saw some blacks, children singing some song around the line of Jim Crow. It was some song that blacks had at that time.
Yeah.
And so he picked up that and went into a minstrel show act. To degrade black
I remember reading that.
Right,
I remember reading that.
Right, and so then as a result of that, these laws were meant to degrade.
Jesus Christ. Oh, man. Boy, oh boy, oh boy.
It's a deep stuff.
The thing about it, though, and I know that it's some of what you referred to in your conversation is, this is the philosophical foundation of the country.
Right.
So when we really look at it, when they talk about the Republicans and what the Republicans are doing, They're really trying to go back to the foundation.
Right, yeah. In fact, I'm going to tell you what they're trying to do.
Okay.
It's worse than that.
All right, go ahead.
They're trying to go past, beyond the foundation.
Oh, Lord. Here we go.
All right, don't give you an example.
All right.
Let's look at the slave codes.
Yeah, fine. Okay, good.
Now, the slave code denied basically all rights. But what it did guarantee, it guaranteed you food, clothing, and shelter.
All right, okay.
And it fined a master who refused to give those.
I've read that, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Now, Gendrich is going beyond that. He's not guaranteed to give you
that. The president can't even have TV.
Right. Well, in fact, you know,
they can't have nothing.
Let me go back and show you this. You know, have you ever heard of the sumptuary laws?
No.
Well, see,
what is this now?
Sumptuary laws.
Sumptuary laws.
Sumptuary.
Okay.
Okay. Now, those laws were enacted to make sure that slaves or enslaved people never exhibited a luxurious station in life, which means that they were penalized if their shoes were a little bit too modern, or their suit, or they had a suit on or something like that and couldn't explain why they had it on.
Jesus.
Right. You know.
Ooh.
Or riding a carriage or a horse. Right.
These were laws in what states? What states?
In all over the South. The sumptuary laws.
I'll be damned.
That's the reason why blacks in the South, even in the 1950s and 40s, even they had a lot of money, they wouldn't buy a Cadillac. That's the reason why we came here. The first thing we wanted was a hog. Right. You know what I mean?
And some shoes.
Right, and some shoes.
And a brand new suit.
Right, that's right. Yeah. No, serious.
Oh, right. Goodness. Oh, here we go. I got to get all of this in the air here. Oh. We're back with you inside of the GBE radio magazine at WLIB 1190 AM. Boy, y'all just don't know. I'm telling you. I'm glad Mr. Brown is here today. I'm serious. Y'all who are watching this will certainly know. Attorney Alton Maddox is with us. Our theme is Understanding Your Power Under the Law, a tribute to a king. We are taking a look at the dynamics of so-called man-made laws versus natural laws. Attorney Maddox is giving us some very, very wonderful insight into this particular subject and some new insights that are about to come your way right now inside of the GBE. I know that there are a couple of you who are standing by with your telephone calls. I did say that you'd have a chance to talk to Attorney Maddox, 212-889-1190. We have a lot of ground to cover and a short time to do it, so I'm going to get right to your telephone calls and come right back with Attorney Maddox to talk a bit more about some areas that he's going to expand on starting from the Declaration of Independence. Thanks for joining us. Good morning. Yes, sir, brother. Good morning.
Shalom to Attorney Maddox.
Shalom, brother.
This is Brother Onan Israel, Nation of Yahweh.
Yes,
oh, brother, perfect. Good to have you with us.
Yes, sir. I'd just like to show my appreciation to WLIB for keeping Yahweh Ben Yahweh's situation in the eyes and ears of the brothers and sisters. And I'd also like to show my appreciation to Attorney Maddox for such an illuminating observation that he has made.
Yes.
Which shows that he has spent a lot of time observing the peculiar nuances of this case, and especially with regard to the topic that you're talking about of man-made law versus natural law. We, in spite of the setbacks that we've received from these decisions, will go on in pursuit of natural law because we know that we are just in our cause. Absolutely. And also, I'd just like to say, with relationship to the federal powers that the federal government use, in particular the RICO statutes, and also the 1984 Bail Reform Act, in which they used to incarcerate Yahweh Ben Yahweh without any evidence, without any opportunity for bail, and just basically violating all constitutional provisions that are laid out. But with regard to the RICO statutes, they are now using this as a financial weapon against any organizations that choose to go against the status quo. It is their tool to use the economic weapon to drain the resources because they are currently using it with the Right to Life movement. They've used it in the case of Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, and they will continue to use it in something that I fear that in the case of the situation or in Harlem. I can see a scenario where, they can turn this into some sort of a racketeering type of situation.
Let's get Attorney Maddox's comments on these points, which I think are excellent, brother, and thank you for the call once again. Attorney Maddox.
Well, I think, one, when you talk about RICO, let us understand that that particular act is designed to the First Amendment, threatening First Amendment rights, and that is rights of group associations and the right to creative thinking, because what we see now in this city particularly is that you have to watch your language, which is a aspect of the black codes and the slave codes, because at that particular time you had to show all etiquette toward white people and impose no slander, or so to speak, or any kind of ill will or ill speaking towards them. And so now we're beginning to see in this particular city, for example, the authorities demanding that leaders tone down what they call their rhetoric, which basically means show more respect toward white people and do as you're told. Now, once you engage in that, it cuts down on your ability to think, because, see, language has a definite relationship to the thought process, which is why we went back to the whole notion of seeing this country as the United Nations of America. You begin to see different realities than by calling it the United States of America. Even some people call it the United Snakes of America, but nonetheless, either way you call it, it still falls short of really recognizing what it is and therefore making some rational decision upon it. But going back to RICO, it is no question again that the fear in this country is black folks forming government. You see, and that is the one notion that we really have never seriously entertained as a wide umbrella of people. I mean, there have been certain segments of our population have dealt with it, but the idea of us forming a government is something that cannot be tolerated, and it is for this reason that this statute has come into existence, you see, to stifle that type of growth that is necessary for us as a people, because the whole 20th century was really towards our prophets coming forward and saying that there's a need for us to form our own government to protect our own interests, even to the point of going to the United Nations, for example. The only way that we can legitimately go to the United Nations is as a government. And once that government is formed, once we have our constitutional convention, once we make our declaration of independence, you see, then we can apply for formal recognition by many of the states themselves. Because you got to realize that Vatican City is a part of the UN with less than 110 acres of land. You see, so we sometimes get confused by this whole land question, when land is not really the basis for the formation of the government, but it's only the extension of the rights by owning land and then being exercised those sovereign rights through land. You mentioned the Declaration of Independence, and to the callers, I'm coming to you in a moment, but you mentioned the Declaration of Independence, and during the break, you were saying that Dr. King had some perspectives about this that were evolving. I'd like you to share some of that. Well, I think one is that I think the thesis that was put forward by Kwame Ture probably says it best. When Kwame Ture has mentioned about the moral dimensions of Dr. King, and the fact that Dr. King was one who could look at an argument, and once he recognized the rationality of that argument, could pursue it as he did with the war in Vietnam. Because let us understand that when he made the October 4th statement at Riverside Church 1 year before he was assassinated on October 4th, this is October 4th, 1967, then 1 year later to the date, he was assassinated, which raised a symbol as to why. That was a very bold act on his part to be able to make that denouncement, because many people in this country, believe me, did not share that view in terms of making that public pronouncement. But Dr. King had listened to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and listened to other young people, who saw an immorality in that war, and it raised contradictions that Dr. King could not reconcile. And so, therefore, Dr. King felt immorally obligated to make the pronouncement that he actually made. Well, this was an evolving man.
This is now you bring up another point. I think that day was April 4th, I think. But you bring up another point now that you said this.
Right.
It's Dr. King's analysis about questioning whether we were integrating into a burning house.
Right. Right. Yeah. You see, and so therefore, he was moving toward what you had earlier said, maybe off the air, about being announced as the president of the Negro people at the March on Washington. You see, and in a real sense, that was the fear of J. Edgar Hoover, because we talking about of the people, for the people, and by the people. We talking about a government. You start talking about the president of the people. And the fact that they may move into some form of structure. All right, and he was a charismatic type of person that could have taken us to that structure. That became a real fear, because Dr. King himself believed the words of the Declaration of Independence, even though they were written by a slaveholder, Thomas Jefferson, but there were certain statements about what he said were absolutely true, whoever wrote it.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Absolutely.
And endowed with certain unalienable rights, among them life, living, pursuit of happiness. I mean, that starts with a major broad thesis in terms of something that Dr. King could reconcile as natural law, because that's what they were basically using as their major premise to come to that conclusion. And through the rationale that Jefferson posed, he then began to talk about the popular sovereignty of the people and what happens when the failure of government happens and the promises that were supposed to be given to the people are now breached. And so it's in that sense that a lot of people remember the Declaration of Independence stating, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, eventually a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. Well, see, that's what he's talking about, popular sovereignty. That's what the Black Panther Party was talking about when they said power to the people. So this has been a concept that has been amongst us, although it may not necessarily have been a popular concept, necessarily pronounced by a lot of us, but nonetheless, that concept has existed in our community.
Let me take a quick break. We've got many of you standing by the telephone lines. We'll come back to you on the phones. We'll come back to more of Attorney Alton Maddox. I'm going to take a look at something that Attorney Maddox will introduce us to called the sumptuary laws that will blow your mind when we come back after this in the Global Black Experience. Gosh, I mean, and I'm hearing the FBI doctrine that says that no black Messiah should rise. Right. And here King is in a position where he's actually changing and adjusting the laws of the United States. And then with a Poor People's March that's going to cross him over into other groups.
No, it was time, from their point of view. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he was out of here.
He was definitely out of here at that point, because he was taking a large body of people with him, you see.
Yeah.
And now he was really striking at the black masses.
Right.
You know what I mean? In a very deep way. He raised this question about the functions of government.
And the issues of poverty that were across the board.
You see,
because the poor whites in Appalachia
absolutely
know they poor.
Absolutely. You know what I mean?
They do know they poor.
They know they poor.
Sure.
And actually, if Dr. King had been on the scene now, with everybody losing their job, I mean, he would have really created a story.
Oh my goodness.
You know what I mean?
It's true.
If he had been here now, I mean, the conditions, were not as ripe as he would have, loved them,
Isn't that interesting? And the moral foundation of the law actually was an expression of his own philosophy. So here he was, best suited to represent that moral dimension of the foundation of the United States. That they were in violation of. My goodness. Yeah, he had to go.
Right. Well, I tell you, you have to be thanked as well, because I woke up this morning, I said, this brother don't really know what he's doing. He invited me on this program to discuss this area. I said, this is divine intervention. You know what I mean?
Yes, it is, brother. Well, I tell you, you remember you were on with us in, it was December or whatever it was. And I've been running into this sovereignty information. And it's been blowing my mind. And then you came on the air, and you said a couple of things, and I said, Alton is the one to come in and elaborate on this piece. Because I'm telling you, it's unbelievable. When you mention the Mormons even. People don't understand the Mormons and that state.
Absolutely.
You
know?
walk into that state,
Right.
You on another planet.
Right. You're on another planet.
I got a brother who went there. He said, Bird, he said, it's another planet.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Right.
He said, Bird, he said, it's another planet out here, man. He said, you don't understand. He said, I've traveled all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
He said, but there ain't no state like this one. He said, this state has got all, he said, man, he said, you look around.
Right.
You said, where is the porno shops? And,
right.
Man, not here.
Yeah.
He said, they don't play that. He said, you got to suddenly say, well, how come all of these people can't get into this state?
Right.
Because they got that state. The Mormons got that state.
And right as a nation.
I'm telling you.
Right.
It's their state.
You know what I mean?
Sure it is.
You know, with foreign policy, you know, relating to nations all over the world.
Absolutely.
And the whole bit.
I went to Miami Airport about a month ago.
Right.
And I haven't been to Miami. Oh my goodness. Oh, wait a minute now. This is getting a little too heavy now. Too serious. You're too legal. He's a lawyer now. Let me come over here. He's erudite. Oh, goodness. Oh, brother. Good to see you. He's so clear. Erudite. Oh, trying to show his training. And where's that box? This love fest. Usually I hadn't even take my radio to listen to this thing. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, it's some serious stuff. It's some serious stuff. It really is. And we were just talking about, I was telling Attorney Maddox, I said it was like last November, December. I'm going through a lot of this information on sovereignty. And as I'm going through all of this, I'm putting together, oh, this is what these white boys are doing. And this is why they blowing up everything. And I'm getting all this, but their sovereignty argument is a deep argument. So I'm like thinking about it, and I have Attorney Maddox on for something completely different. And he said something, and I said, this is the person to take us into this conversation. Okay? And I mean, it's what you opening up here is, GBE Radio Magazine at WLIB, Sister Rosa Parks bringing us back, and of course that dimension quite recent. As a matter of fact, in the 1950s in relationship to the issues that led to the Montgomery bus boycott, but surrounded by a host of laws. As you have been hearing Attorney Alton Maddox comment, we're theming our program, Understanding Your Power Under the Law, a tribute to a king. Attorney Maddox is joining us. He is our guide through this particular matrix of law that we move through, so-called man-made law and the natural laws of God. We're joined today by Nana Leonard Jeffries, who's going to be appearing tonight at the Slave Theater, and a special tribute as well. Attorney Maddox, before I go any further, we're going to go right to the calls as well, but I want you to comment about something you were talking to us off the air about in the last section of the GBE, the sumptuary laws. What were they?
Well, you know, one of the things hopefully we're going to talk about over the next 2 weeks is just how regulated this society is and where Newt Gingrich intends to try to take us back to. But the sumptuary laws were laws that were enacted, particularly that related to black people, where their clothing and their attire and their lifestyles were regulated, even to the extent that if you wore something that looked too new or too fine, you could be criminalized for that. So it was not only in terms of your conduct, but in terms of the way that you appeared. Now, you know what's so interesting about that is that I started law school at the University of Georgia in the late 1960s, and there was a brother who had preceded me and who now sits on the Georgia Supreme Court. But when he first came to the University of Georgia, one of the white students came up to him, and this was around 1967 or 68, came up to him and said, look, I just cannot stand the way that you dress. You know, it just bothers me to see a Negro wearing a suit and tie every day. That bothers me. And where I'm from, we don't allow that. The county that I'm from does not allow that unless you're a preacher, and you are not a preacher. And told him that it bothered him so that he was prepared to pay for the rest of his law school education if he got out of those clothes. Because that was just something that never existed in his way of life. And see, these laws have been carried down through the books. This is why when a lot of times when black people left the South and they came up here, the first thing they wanted to do was to get a Cadillac, many of them, or a fur, or if they didn't get that, they rented one and came back to the South as a means of rebellion or defiance.
Sharkskin suits,
Sharkskin suits,
Yeah.
you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All of that happened. I mean, I can remember in the 1960s that a person from Queens County, New York, was driving through my home county in a Cadillac with New York plates on it, and he was run off of the road and was left paralyzed and had to be hospitalized in my hometown, and my father and my mother kept his family because, you know, at that particular time it was hard for them to find accommodations, and they stayed there in Georgia for many months only because he was riding through Georgia in a Cadillac with New York plates on.
Now, Jeffries.
Well, I think we have to understand how serious is this pathology.
Yes.
You see, when I was talking about the curriculum struggle, we said what we have discovered is that there is a racial pathology, a sickness, and it reflects itself in the culture. So when the people who are designing the culture began to put together the laws and began to put together the policies and the practices, they built this sickness in, and we have to see it for what it is.
Absolutely.
A pathological sickness, and even though they may manifest it in a straight face like Giuliani, but it's still there, and it's still very deep.
Of the oppressor, which would somewhat put you in a real danger zone.
Absolutely.
And so, therefore, I said, look, try to reach anybody. You know, I give you some names as a form of resistance for many years. It's just it hadn't really been done in the legal profession.
Okay.
You know, lawyers had not really perfected the system of non-cooperation, but it had been done elsewhere. So you began to elevate civil disobedience, you know, into the legal profession where it had not been done somewhere else.
Let me ask you a question about this. I have talked with some people, and these are some cases people who are involved in some sovereignty issues, and they have said to me that in reading the codes of the oath and whatnot,
Sure.
lawyers accept that to a great extent they are under a certain kind of mandate to follow certain laws of the court that ultimately in some cases almost makes them an enemy to their client.
Yeah, well,
Can you comment about that?
Well, you know, it is. Just let me.
Because that puts what you're
Sure,
saying in
sure.
another context, because not only are you engaging in the protest that you're talking about, but you're doing it in a situation where there is a oath, presumably, that you have to follow that ultimately places you at conflict with your client to some extent.
Well, it does, and that was the whole fear that I had.
Yeah.
Was the fact that I couldn't turn on my clients. See, that was the whole problem. That's the reason why, in situations like Howard Beach, you know, something like that had never happened before in the sense of a special prosecutor, you know, and then ultimately people being convicted, even though not necessarily what they should have gotten, but just the idea there was some form of conviction. These were things that were contrary to custom, you see, which is also very important in the law, because the law, to a large extent, is based on custom. What are the customs? You know, that's what Dr. King was struggling against in Alabama, in Georgia, and Mississippi. Reason versus custom. The issue of whether reality controls thoughts or whether thoughts control reality. You see? So, therefore, it wasn't the custom to do the things that I did in that way, because that is more than anything else. Lawyers ultimately have to uphold the system that feeds them, you see, and not try to tear it down. They can move within it, but not try to expose it to the light, you know, show the contradictions and inconsistencies in it, you know, and so those are the parameters. And so then when Tawana Brawley came up, and, you know, Sonny Carson knows this, I, like everybody else, was very outraged at what had happened, you know, what I heard in the Brawley case. And that was like on a Saturday or Sunday, you know, you heard it on radio, you know, what happened to this young girl. And obviously we were all outraged about that. But then the family started calling me. and then things started, going a little different. I mean, I'm just being honest about
I understand,
it,
yes.
And I wasn't taking the calls. All right, I mean, really, that's real.
Is that right?
Yeah, I wasn't taking the calls because you see, again, you begin to recognize what your conscience is going to dictate you to do if you have to get involved, and your fear that the consciousness in your community is not great enough to really sustain you beyond it. See, that's the real problem, you see.
Absolutely.
Because when they start throwing these things out here to the black community about what she should have done and this and that, then our people get all confused.
And how
know what I
wrong
mean?
you are
And
if
how
you took a
wrong-
particular
right,
step. Yeah.
and all of that. So, you know, then you begin to say, you know, what I know has to be done doesn't square with what my people encompass in terms of their ability to really appreciate it and to sustain it and to really support it. So therefore, I just didn't return the calls, you know, and I felt very bad about that too. But then I knew that if I returned the call, I was going to do something the other lawyer was not going to do.
Hold on to that point. Hold on. We'll come right back.
He thought this was
Yeah, this is,
okay.
and I said to myself, is this the same brother getting ready to say something to me about language? I said, all right, fine. And he was all right for a minute.
Right.
But then when it was language,
Right.
period,
Right.
no issue of philosophy,
Right.
that's when I said,
right.
no.
No, right.
You know,
Right.
no. I mean,
Right.
you act like people in Africa speaking their own language and don't have a philosophy. And they
Right.
don't. They don't.
No,
I
right.
mean, it's crazy. You know, and it's funny because more and more you see it very clearly that when we talk about like having a national culture, the problem with us having a national culture is we don't have a philosophy, a
That's it.
common philosophy.
Right. We don't have the same beliefs.
We don't.
Right.
You know, and what happens
Right.
is, and frankly,
Right.
what's crazy is we might, but we ain't never declared it.
Declared it. Right. That's it. Right.
We don't even know if we got the
have-
same beliefs.
Right. We don't. Right. That's it. You know what I mean?
It's crazy.
Because you know when you look at Malcolm and Dr. King, the interesting thing is that starting with the major premise, they were all in agreement
Exactly.
that the system was unjust.
Exactly.
You
That's
know what I
right.
mean?
That's
You
right.
know,
That's right.
one thing that they
That's
were
right.
not in disagreement about.
They had a special
Right.
on Dr. King.
Right.
Actually, it wasn't on Dr. King. Maybe it was on the civil rights movement.
Right.
ABC did it about a week ago. And a friend of mine called me on Sunday. It was in during Like It Is. During the
Okay.
time that Like It Is
Oh,
was
yeah?
normally on. Yeah.
Right.
And Lou Gossett or somebody was, I think, hosting it.
Right.
But they had a clip of Malcolm that I caught. I've never seen
Right.
this clip
Clip
before.
before.
But Malcolm said, he was talking about the march on, the Selma
Right.
March.
So,
He said, I may not agree with all the tactics of Dr. King.
Right.
He said, but in principle, he's right.
Right. Yeah.
And I had never seen this.
Right.
You know, but it was Malcolm saying
Saying it, right.
In principle, he's right. In principle is
Right.
back to what you're saying about philosophy.
Right.
Of
You
course,
see?
yeah.
Right. You see,
Yeah.
and that, but you see, we don't even have those philosophical discussions anymore.
That's
I
right.
mean, even people, when they make speeches to us, they're not dealing into philosophy.
Right,
And they're
exactly.
not dealing with history. You know what I
Sure,
mean?
sure.
I mean, and you saw that and heard that with Malcolm, Dr. King, you know, and
Exactly.
Marcus Garvey,
Yeah.
Marcus Garvey. You heard that. You know
That's
what I mean?
right, that's
you know,
right.
you heard the philosophy, you heard the history. You know
That's
what I mean?
right.
That was the beauty of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Came a time in 1506, after we lost power in Spain, the Africans ruled Spain from 711. We were calling ourselves Moors, M-A-U-E-R-S, then M-O-O-R-S. From 711 until 1485, 774 years, when we built and brought into Europe the university system, building the University of Salamanca, S-A-L-A-M-A-N-C-A in Spain, a copy of the University of Genève from ancient Ghana, which was equally a copy of the University of Sankore in Tombouctou, which the French later called Timbuktu. Now, look, if you want to read it, read Stanley Lane Poole's The Moors in Spain, written in 1887, or Alejandro Macaziza. Read his book in Spanish, The Moors in Spain.
And that's what has gone away from our argument today. It doesn't have a philosophical base.
Isn't this some? Hold on, here we go. We're back with you inside of the GBE Radio Magazine, Philosophy and the Law, today with attorney Alton Maddox joining us in our theme, Understanding Our Power Under the Law. I'm Imhotep Gary Bird. Attorney Maddox, you were talking with us about the Brawley case, and you were mentioning that you had initially some reluctance to accept it, and that reluctance was based on what you knew it was going to take to actually address this case successfully, and that related to what had developed as your philosophy in relationship to the law.
Yeah, and what happened was Sonny Carson who had my home number. Still probably does, because Sonny and I have, we've been close over the years. Even though sometimes we have our little disagreements, but he know I love him and he loves me, I'm sure.
Yes.
But he called me early one morning and said, "Brother, this is Sonny Carson." And I said, "Yes, Sonny, what's going on?" "The Brawley's been trying to reach you." And I said, "Oh yeah?" Knowing that they had, And he said, "Brother, this cannot go undressed, and I don't know what's wrong here, but I immediately demand that you get on the phone right away and get him a call. If you don't have a number, I had a number right here." And so the rest is history,
Yes.
But you see, the point of it is that I knew that the system was evil. I knew there was a historic pattern of rape and murder and maiming of our women.
And Sonny Carson clearly knew you were the person who had to.
Well, apparently he did. I wish he had called someone else. But my point though is that when you get caught up with a real philosophy,
yes,
you see, of life, not emotions. See, I don't want to. I don't like to be around people who say, "Well, I just hate white people. That's why I'm here." That's what I'm doing this because I hate white people. Well, you see, that person doesn't really understand the parameters of what is really at issue. Just to simply hate somebody, that's why I'm here. I'm operating on my emotions. You see, not no philosophical base, because see, those emotions can be tampered with.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? They can be soothed, they can be dealt with. But when you have a deep philosophical base, you see, it's hard to really deviate from that. That's the reason why everybody with a philosophy have either been killed or jailed, you see, because that's something totally different. People don't worry about people who just hate somebody on emotions. But when you develop a philosophy, you see, and that's what is lacking in terms of black leadership today. You don't hear philosophical arguments today. You don't hear any reference to philosophy or any reference to history in what they say. And I have gone back and started reading again philosophy opinions of Marcus Garvey, the philosophy of Dr. King, the philosophy of Malcolm X, and then you begin to compare those teachings and writings with what is going on today, and you realize that that's the void. You see, that's the ethics is lacking. When Dr. King, for example, went off on marches, the first thing that people had to do was go through self-purification. You see, before they did anything, they had to purify themselves.
And he called it that.
Right, yeah, he called it that, you see, because you see, your ethics had to be correct. I mean, your judgment had to be on high standards, the ability to make the right choice, to engage in the right action, had to be based on your ethics. None of that is happening today, you see. So we have lost a lot of what has been given to us. We just didn't pass it on. We just didn't embrace it. We began to commercialize the movement, you see, and deal with techniques instead of dealing with philosophy and history, that really could propel us once again back into our greatness.
Let's talk about this in relationship to the people. And I say the people because in that sense, if the leadership is not coming with a philosophical foundation in its presentation, then one usually won't expect the people to be operating with one.
Right.
How do we make, and what adjustments do you think we need to make now to develop a philosophy? I'm going to point to two stories very quickly. One is the story that Glenda Cadogan has, this thing about the police nightmare for the Flatbush mother where the police broke in to the house. It is only one of many stories that clearly indicate police abusing authority at a higher level and an increased level across the city. Another story that appeared yesterday in a rag which I won't name, but it has a judge who you may be familiar with. His name is Judge Harold Rothwax. You're laughing already, see? This is New York State Supreme Court Justice who's been called the Prince of Darkness, it says, and who's presided over some of the most high-profile cases of recent years. He has a book called Guilty. And he talks about a number of things. He says he wants to limit a suspect's right to an attorney during interrogation. He limited the defendant's right to a speedy trial. He wants to change the jury system. He says some jurors aren't smart enough to reach the right verdict, and on and on. I mean, it's worse than that, but I'm just giving you highlights. But here's two scenarios. One where the public is actually saying, this thing is happening. The police are coming in. They're breaking in. This is clearly brutality. What do we do about that? And there's no philosophy, apparently, of leadership that brings us together on that. And then here is a judge who's actually saying, look, let's forget all this. We're wasting time. One of the points he makes is that police have the right to go through whatever they need to interrogate a suspect. How else will they get to the truth?
Well,
Please.
I want to deal with 2 points. One is personal experience with Judge Harold Rothwax.
All right.
But before I go to the personal experience with him, I want to do this as a foundation, which I think maybe encompass and explain what all this is about.
All right.
You know, when you look at the law itself, there's so many areas of the law. You know, you have trust law and contracts law and constitutional law and agency law and bailment law. It's just on and on and on, you know. And so you look at all these large subjects, you know, and say, wow, you know, I mean, how do I grasp all of that, you know? And when I went to law school, you know, obviously I always wanted to look for something easy to get me through this because I didn't have a lot of time to be spending these classrooms and all of that, you know, because I had other things to do, you know. The worst thing in the world is to go to European schools and then having to sit in their classrooms and listen to stuff that just really made no sense at all, you know. So what I did a lot of times was play hooky and didn't go to school. But I also, you know, analyzed the law at home or wherever I was to try to find a common denominator, the least common denominator, to sort of guide you through all of this.
All right.
And what I came up with is that ultimately, law as was taught to us here in this country all boil down to rights and duties. Rights and duties.
Okay.
That's what it boils down to. Now, one thing about critical thinking is in looking at what somebody said, the first thing you should do is to go back and say, well, what they didn't say. Now, I said rights and duties. I did not say right and wrong.
Absolutely.
I did not say good and bad. I said rights and duties. You see? So, therefore, what you begin to understand is that the whole issue of right and wrong, the ethical concerns, the moral concerns that we have, is not what the law is about at all. You see, when we look at these stories, and man, wasn't that bad? Man, wasn't that wrong? You know, I mean, you see what they did to that sister over there with those 6 children. Wasn't that wrong?
Okay.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Wasn't that bad? But that's not what the law is about. The law is about rights and duties, not right and wrong. Wow. You see, so we are operating on a whole spit that don't even relate to our reality. You see, and so we get caught up in the confusion of not understanding the structure in which we are operating in.
There's 2 points let me throw out here very quickly. Right. The woman said in the story, she said, when I asked them to see a search warrant, one cop said to me, lady, you watch too much TV, we don't need a warrant. After they tore up the floor and didn't find anything, the officer said, we're sorry, we did not find what we were looking for, but we are just doing our jobs.
You know, what they're simply saying, you see, is this. The other concept is lawful authority and arbitrary power. See,
say this again.
Lawful authority.
Lawful authority.
And arbitrary power.
And arbitrary power. Okay.
See, the reason why the system is unjust is because public officials exercise against us arbitrary power. You see, so therefore, it's not a question of whether there's any real relationship to us and them, whether there are any rules that really control us or not. Because if you go back to a historical point, you got to recognize that the legal system has never applied reason to us. See, that's important because the whole institutional law is supposed to be based on reason. The ability to reason, the ability to make deductions, you know, come to rational conclusions. I mean, that's the whole essence of the legal system. But we have always been part of a formula. You see, the codes that were written were always based on formulas and not principles. So therefore, there was nothing to reason from. You just fit in that formula or not. For example, now, you go to court, and let's say that Imhotep Gary Bird was charged with murder. Now, we go in the courtroom for the arraignment, and, you know, and I'll say, well, Judge, you know, and let's say it was a murder of some white person, you know. And I'll say, well, Judge, you know, first of all, Mr. Bird is presumed innocent, you know. Well, I mean, but he's obviously thinking that you're guilty, you know what I mean?
Exactly right. Here we go.
Know, right, here we go. Yeah. You know, he's presumed innocent. He has a station in life. You know, he's part of WLIB family. You know, there's no possibility of escape. I mean, everybody know him and all of that. But in that particular case, even if bail was permitted, you know, it would be something like, well, it's $5 million. You see what I'm saying? Because he's not dealing with reason. He's not reasoning about whether you are a bail risk or not. He's just applying a mechanical formula. to your status. You see, that's why Judge Bruce Wright got in a lot of trouble, because Justice Wright was applying reasoning to everybody who came before him. You see, rather than applying a mechanical rule. You see, and so therefore, when white judges looked at what he was doing, they said, hey, wait a minute. I mean, how could you let this man get out of here, for $5,000 bail? This should have been $100,000 because, hey, that's the formula. You know what I mean? You know what we do in these cases. Well, you said, well, but he has a station in life, he's married, he doesn't have a rent. Hey, that doesn't mean, that's dealing with reason. We're not dealing with reason. We don't reason with black folks. You see what I'm saying? It's just like you take a Volkswagen to a mechanic, and then you take a Rolls Royce, that same mechanic, you say, well, this is a Rolls Royce. He said, yeah, I know what it is. I can see it. I mean, your thing is like, I know you've been working on Volkswagen, but now you're working on a Rolls Royce. And the guy said, yeah, I know I'm working on a Rolls Royce now. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's what happens when you go into a courtroom. You know what I mean? I know who I'm dealing with now. I can see him. He's standing right before me. I know that the same tools that I would use on a Rolls Royce, I'm not to use on him. This is a Volkswagen and not a Rolls Royce. So it is just ingrained. You see, that's because that's part of the custom, that we're dealing with. Now, saying all of that, just going back to Judge Rothwax.
Okay.
I've been for Judge Rothwax on several occasions, and all that he's stating there is not surprising, although there would, may have been some that said that, in an earlier time he's supposed to have been a liberal, supposed to be a representative of the poor. I think he worked with Legal Aid or something.
ACLU and all that.
Right, all of that, And so now he comes to these views. But that's the same thing that happened with the Scottsboro Bar's attorney, who came back to New York as a Supreme Court justice and became a terror, on the bench, after having represented blacks in the South in that particular case. But I remember a particular case that I had with him.
Rothwax.
Judge Rothwax.
Okay, yeah.
In which there were four young men who lived in East Harlem, and they had been accused of shooting an elderly Italian woman, point blank range, in a public housing project in East Harlem. And obviously, things got very tight in that case. Obviously. In fact, one night in the courthouse, we had a big scuffle there. I mean, they just came out and started beating up the young men, and I was caught in the middle of that. The one thing that I really found out that you need to learn is judo or something like that.
It's deep.
Right, it's deep.
They don't tell you that in law school.
Right, they don't tell you that in law school.
Exactly,
because they held this case over until the night when everybody left. It was just me, 3 white attorneys who could care less, because the white attorneys told me that they were going to defend them, but they hoped they get every bit of what they deserved.
And they were defending them?
And they were defending them, So I was really out there by myself. But when we went before Judge Rothwax on a later date, the case, they wanted to dispose of the case. And these young men were under 16, so they were subject to the juvenile offender law, which does allow for prosecution of persons under 16 as adults, in certain specified cases. One of them would be murder in the second degree. This was a charge of felony murder, meaning that in the course of a robbery, they shot someone to death. Therefore, you don't have to really deal with the questions of intent and things of that nature to demonstrate responsibility, for murder on that level. So we before Judge Rothwax, and they wanted to dispose of one of the young men's case. This was a young man who was only 13 years of age. And so, obviously our people have no idea really what the law is about. But I'm in the well with the other lawyers. That mean in the well mean that in an area, of the bench. And we all standing there. So the judge is talking to the lawyer that represents this 13-year-old and saying, we got to get him to plead guilty to this felony murder. All right? And so the lawyer said, yes, Judge, we got to do that. And I'm working on, I think I got it covered, in a few minutes we can work this out. Now I'm standing there too. This is not my client. But the law is that a 13-year-old cannot be prosecuted on felony murder. All right? In that case, has to go to family court. So the court didn't have jurisdiction over him.
Amazing.
All right? Yeah. But he wasn't, nobody was aware of that. but me, obviously, you know. And so we were sitting there, and it got to the point where they said, well, we think we got a plea. He's ready to plead guilty, which means now that he is going to be subject to adult court, you know, with a criminal record, as opposed to going to family court where he wouldn't have had a record, you see what I'm saying? But because he was involved with this white woman, you know, they had to lump him in together. So again, now you're dealing with your conscience, you see. So, you know, I said, you know, Judge, I said, that just can't happen. He said, what do you mean? I said, now, all of us sitting here, we all know that what the law is. You don't have jurisdiction over this 13-year-old. This young man, regardless of what you may think of him, has the benefit of the law. And his case should go to family court. This case is not going to family court. He's going down just like everybody else. I said, no, he's not. You don't even represent him. I said, you're right, I don't. I said, but we're talking about right and wrong, Judge. He said, I don't want to hear that. You get out of here. And I said, you can order me out of the well of this courtroom, but you can't order me out of the courtroom, because the courtroom for the public, and I'm part of the public. And I said, I will go out of the well of this courtroom. I will stand out there in the public, but if I see this young man plead guilty to these criminal charges, it's going to be me and y'all. He's going to get out of the well. And I did. But they had to send the case to family court.
They did.
But they had to. You see.
They've been exposed.
Right. Had been exposed. See, so that's what, you know, really happened. So Judge Rothway is one of those who just seen a million of these cases, and it's just absolutely bitter. I mean, that's really what it all boils down to. You know, judges like that, if they can be saved at all, they should be moved around. You know, they should be spending some time on civil court and divorce court, you know, something like that. But what they do, they put these judges who probably already have that bent anyway. I'm not justifying that, but even giving him the best gloss.
Yes.
You see, having this man to sit in the same place year in and year out, you know, even if he was the most decent person 15 years ago, you see, it just, the system creates that.
His book is called Guilty.
Okay.
So, so what is he saying to us?
Right.
He's saying whatever it is,
right,
guilty.
Right. And you see, but what is happening is because he has spent that much time, even if he was a good legal aid attorney, even if he was a good do-gooder, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Even if you assume all of that.
He's been poisoned.
He's been poisoned.
Yeah.
You see? And that's what we're up against today.
And hypothetically, then, here we get an unsuspecting public that doesn't know that it's walking into his courtroom.
Right.
Oh,
right. You know,
goodness gracious.
and believe me, you got to remember that Judge Rothwax was also the judge that barred one of O.J.'s lawyers from going out to California to help O.J. in the DNA case.
It was him?
It was him.
I want to have you come back to something for a moment on this issue of philosophy. How does the community, and I say this, I guess, to some extent, regardless of whether or not leadership develops that philosophy, how does the community and its organizations begin to recognize this issue of developing philosophy and begin the construction of philosophy?
Well, you know, one of the things that I really find in Hotel is that we have to be prepared to accept the truth. See, and there are certain truths that we as a people just don't want to address.
Hold on to that point. Certain truths.
Came a time in 1506, after we lost power in Spain. The Africans ruled Spain from 711. We were calling ourselves Moors, M-A-U-E-R-S, then M-O-O-R-S.
We are a nation within a nation in this country searching for a nationality. And once we find our nationality and serve that nationality, we'll do for ourselves what needs to be done. All ethnic groups in this country understand they got a nationality, because you answer to such stupid words like Negro and colored and black. You have no nationality. Negro is not a nationality. Some lazy Portuguese or Spaniard took an adjective and made a noun out of it. Colored is not a nationality. Black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are. Right. The name of a people must relate them instantaneously to land, history, and culture. And anytime you call a people by their right name, anytime you call a people, name a people, and fail to relate them back to land, history, and culture, you have called them out of their name. There's no black land or black holder. There's nothing wrong with the word black. Nothing wrong with it at all. Only it doesn't relate to a country. The name of every people in the world relate to country. And once you think instantaneously of land, you think of nationality. You belong to something big in the world.
We'll come right back. Attorney Alton Maddox with us inside of the GBE, Philosophy and the Law. Your telephone calls are next as well. And we'll hear what Attorney Maddox has to say on the issue of certain truths when we come back. Once again, this is the Global Black Experience. Our theme, understanding our power under the law, a tribute to a king. Okay. Comment about the OJ case in this article.
Oh, he done?
He sure did. Yeah,
Right.
he had some kind of nasty comments he was making. Yeah, he sure did.
Well, I mean, if he was a nice guy 15 years ago, he is deaf, man.
Here it is. It said he ponders Simpson's long courtroom silence and asked, why should not the jury have been instructed by Judge Ito that they might draw an adverse inference from his failure to deny or explain the evidence against him? He says abandon Miranda rights, abolish rigid speedy trial statutes.
Yeah, but let's go back to what he said. Now, the point then is that he was helping Ito and the prosecution by trying to deprive him of his right to counsel.
Absolutely.
Because he had this lawyer here in his courtroom that he said, you better not go to California.
So he's developed a philosophy.
So he developed a philosophy.
Yeah, exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
And therefore, told him, you better not go to California. This was one of the leading lawyers on DNA. That's why they couldn't really push the DNA. That's why they had to give it up, because the lawyer couldn't come. You remember the so-called Fry challenge that they were going to make?
I remember,
the scientific reliability of
I
DNA,
remember, yeah.
They had to withdraw. Well, part of the reason why they had to withdraw because Ralph White held the lawyer in custody here.
Give judges greater sway over their courtrooms to shorten trials and steer proceedings toward the discovery of truth.
Yeah. That's where it's at.
And this guy is in there.
He's in there. And well thought of in there. Okay?
Deep.
Well thought of.
Deep. What's up?
Personal.
You got
that Clemson Brown.
All right.
No, I got your message. I don't return no calls. I've been going through some personal things with my oldest son, but
listen, your office was very helpful to me.
Oh yeah?
But I'll talk to you later.
All right. Okay.
Two things. Here's a group of people.
Right.
The woman was broken into. It's clearly illegal. What rights does she have?
Well, you see that? I'm gonna get into that.
All right. Fine.
I really get into that before I even get to the truth part, because I just threw it out there. But I'll deal with the truth. You know.
All right. Fine.
Right.
Okay.
But I really want to catch them before I lose them.
No problem.
You know what I mean?
Okay. So
right.
Truths. And we'll come back
right.
to that. Okay.
You know
no, I understand, brother.
Right,
no.
I had to take a step.
But this is a heavy subject.
Right. You know what I mean? And sometimes you have to build up to a certain proposition. Sometimes I throw a proposition out there, but I really need to build up to it so people can really see it.
Grasp it. Yeah.
Grasp it,
And see, this thing here, which is a model really on a whole series of other stories that are similar. Because, as a matter of fact, I had someone tell me that in Brooklyn, they actually took a bus. It was apparently like not a school bus, but a bus that school kids go on.
Oh, right.
And that they stopped the bus and had the kids get out, okay? Get off the bus, and the guy got all of the different ID from all these kids, right? Like a lineup, okay? And apparently there was some identification issues of whether or not any of them matched some suspect for something.
Right.
And this is a bus. They stopped a regular, like M12 or whatever, bus and had the kids get off the bus. Okay, and that's also preceded by the police, as just what this woman is saying, busting down the doors of different apartments, saying that they're doing it based on drug reports.
Right.
They just bust, and this is in Brooklyn. They bust in and just break down the doors. Now, what is the right of a person in that situation.
See, it's not, but see, that's the whole thing. It's not the right.
Okay.
What we're suffering from today are rights without remedies.
Whoosh.
Alton, they are not revoked. They just went on and passed amendments. But the codes were never revoked.
We'll deal with that. We'll get that.
Hold on. Here we go. We're back with you inside of the GBE Radio Magazine. I see a bank of you standing by on the telephone lines. We're coming right to your calls. Attorney Alton Maddox wants to give us some analysis and insight, though, on the story that we mentioned concerning the Flatbush mother who had about 4 children who were actually the victims of a 4-hour reign of terror by detectives assigned to the 78th Precinct in Flatbush. It is one story among many, Attorney Maddox, in which we see the police clearly abusing power. And I asked you what were the rights that people have in these situations, and you said we're dealing with something else now. We got, what do we got? We got reason versus custom. We got rights and duties. We got formula versus principle, and now we have rights versus what?
Well, you know, when you ask me the question, what rights do they have a magnitude of rights, but they have a scarcity of remedies.
A scarcity of remedies.
Right, and that's the problem that we're facing today as a people. We've been given all of these rights, but we have rights now without remedies. And so, if you notice, the greatest right of all in this society would be the writ of habeas corpus. And that basically has been done away with. I mean, it's really on its deathbed, you know, without even a respirator.
Explain what you mean by habeas corpus.
Well, the writ of habeas corpus basically means that that is the way of challenging any kind of illegal confinement, you see. And so, even though you have a right not to be illegally confined, but you also cannot engage in self-help. You see, that's what we've gotten down to, where if something happens to you, you have to wait on the law. You know, you can't do something yourself. If the police come in and start beating you upside your head, you know, then you have what is called a no-sock provision, you know, in the law to say you can't do anything but take the beating. You see, so we have been, first of all, the right of self-help has been taken away from us. And now we're talking about the remedies are being chipped away at now, so that, for example, in a few years to come, and we're going to get into this in a few minutes, hopefully, if not, maybe next time, with Newt Gingrich, with his new welfare reforms, which are not welfare reforms at all. They're just simply going back to the old way of criminalizing poverty, you see, which is what used to happen as a way of deterring, because the idea was if you penalize people and make it punitive, then people won't ask for help, you see, because they will get something that they don't want in return. So here, for example, in 10 or 15 years, most of our young people are going to be in orphanages, you know, because the state's going to take them away from our parents. And so being in that orphanage, you have to have some way of challenging how to get your child out of the orphanage. But if the writ of habeas corpus have been taken away from you, you may have a right to your child, but if you have no remedy, then you have no way of ever obtaining your child back, because you can't bust in there yourself.
So you have a right to your child,
but you don't have a remedy.
But you don't have a remedy.
Right. You see, because you can't engage in self-help, and you can't ask for the writ of habeas corpus the way it's being chipped away at now. So we have all of these rights. So we went through the 60s. They would just say, oh yeah, you got a right to this, you got a right to that, you got all these rights. But as they were giving us these rights, they were chipping away at all our remedies, and we were not looking at that. Now you have Rule 11 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, which penalizes lawyers for going into courts with you in the first place.
What do you mean by that?
Well, basically it means that if they can show that a reasonable lawyer would not have taken your case, you know, like, for example, a reasonable person probably be Judge Harold Rothweiss, you know. He would be the reasonable man. And so therefore, if Harold Rothweiss didn't take your case and you took it, then you can be penalized and be bankrupt. You know, and that's what they're doing now to lawyers who take certain cases, and they are finding that those cases, in their opinion, have no merit, you see. Therefore, the lawyer has to be penalized. So lawyers now are very skeptical about getting involved in civil rights on a federal level, you see, or human rights, or whatever you want to characterize. And then in the state is moving toward the same thing. So what we are missing is that we don't even have a catalog of what they're doing in these legislative sessions.
That's right. That's right.
You see, we don't even have a catalog. I mean, we see it month after month. They don't even know what they're doing up in Albany.
Yeah, we keep hearing about a contract.
Right. Yeah.
With America.
Right.
But we don't know the details of the contract. Right. Exactly.
You know, so that's really what it is. So one, you're dealing with the question of rights without remedies, and then the other thing you're dealing with is that in this system, rights and duties are regulated by power. So if you are powerless, then your duties is going to always exceed your rights. You see, so you can always, the law can come out here today and say, well, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do whatever, you know what I mean? But that's because of your powerless state, you can't regulate any rights that you conceivably may have theoretically, because the regulation of rights and duties depends upon your power.
What would shift that balance, of that imbalance, I should say?
Well, let's go back, for example, to Dr. King, Dr. King recognized that everybody has some power. I mean, we had hardly anybody in the legislative session, so we had hardly anybody on the bench. Thurgood Marshall came in pretty much after Dr. King, not during the time or before.
In 1912, Dr. Walter Plecker became the first director of the Bureau of Vital Statistics. Prior to that, there were no birth certificates, and he was a director up until the 1940s, 1946, until his death. But he was part of the Eugenics movement, which was a movement about creating one race of people, which was white, and everything else was put in a pot, as Tina Marie would say, and stir it up and called colored. But he went beyond board on that, wherein as far as first Americans are concerned, he changed birth certificates and marriage license. He even put out letters to census takers in 1930 that people such as myself that are first Americans and Native Americans, that he considered us as being bastards, that we were just trying to be Indian to marry into the white race.
But basically, when he was the registrar for the Bureau of Vital Records, he changed the names of Indian people in Southampton County, their race, from Indian to Negro or colored.
Well, it was referred to as colored, and basically all the tribes in Virginia in the early 1900s were referred to as colored. Okay, then after the 1924 Racial Integrity Act, everything that was in that colored bowl became Negro.
Census takers in the late 1800s listed them as Negro or black, removing their Native American identities with the stroke of a pen.
I used to ask my mother, I said, why is my grandfather so quiet? He never had much to say, and it's coming pretty clear to me as why he was so quiet.
Because at that time, they did not talk about being Indians because you could be jailed, correct?
Exactly. There was a lot of bad things that could have happened to you if you were Native and if you were caught off the reservation.
Because the regulation of rights and duties depends upon your power.
What would shift that balance, of that imbalance, I should say?
Well, let's go back, for example, to Dr. King. Dr. King recognized that everybody has some power. I mean, we had hardly anybody in the legislative session, so we had hardly anybody on the bench. Thurgood Marshall came in pretty much after Dr. King, not during the time or before Dr. King. So therefore, he was operating with whatever you have. You see, and so basically, what Dr. King was dealing with was the whole idea that there's a divine purpose, for all of us, and that man is only part of that instead of the divine purpose. You see what I'm saying? He's only part of that. Now, what is interesting? This is
philosophy coming back.
Right, this philosophy coming back.
Yeah.
But I have to make mention of one thing, which has always fascinated me when I walked into a courtroom. It always said, "In God we trust." And then, you have this white judge in black robes under it. And then you say, well, what God are we talking about? All right? Now, if Jesus Christ had come down here, particularly in the 1800s, for example, and there was a trial that was going on, and Jesus could provide information in that trial, all right? And the purpose of a trial is to seek the truth. Jesus would have been incompetent to testify.
On what basis?
Because he was black.
I thought you would say that.
See, and blacks was incompetent to testify. So,
you gotta do something, y'all black. That means you're dead. Legally. I'm a black minority. I'm a person that's a black minority. Either way you go, you're locking yourself into some stuff you don't need to be in. You gotta learn how to disassociate yourself from the words that you've grown accustomed to using to identify yourself.
Therefore, when we talk about in God we trust, and what God are we talking about?
Yes, exactly.
You see, are we talking about the white man who deified himself as God? Or are we talking about some divine being?
And clearly, we, I guess, have to acknowledge that there was indeed, however one wants to describe it, a philosophy behind that conceptual framework that does not allow Jesus to come in the courtroom.
Absolutely, right,
Yeah.
right.
There's a philosophy.
right.
This isn't just an arbitrary decision.
Right. This is a philosophy, you see, that deals with that whole particular concept. Now, but just going back, I have to make this point because I think this is something that really has to be rectified, and I have expressed it to the parties, involved in terms of what we have to do. Today, we have placed a lot more emphasis on the vote than we should have, and that's not to say that it's not relevant because certainly Dr. King advocated that, and then you had Malcolm X ballot a bullet, and then you had people like Samuel Cornish and others even before the Civil War, who talked about ballots or bullets, even before that particular time. So I'm not in any way demeaning the vote, although I think it is not as simple as some of us think it is in terms of making it meaningful. It's a lot more involved than just in every 4 years, for example, going down and voting for the president, and then leaving it at that. That's a lot more involved. But you see, Dr. King never tried his cases in the court of law. He tried his case in the court of public opinion. You see, and that's very critical. We are today spending too much time in legislative halls and in courthouses instead of the law of the court of public opinion. Now, Dr. King quoted Hegel, a German philosopher of the late 18th century and early 19th century, where Hegel talked about there can be no growth without struggle. Pretty much, piggyback on what Frederick Douglass said later, what Frederick, in terms of there can be no progress without struggle, and that in growth and struggle there must be pain. So the essence of Dr. King was that his feeling that there always had to be pain, you see, and that's very important because there's something that has to be corrected in terms of people the other day, in my opinion, making statements in the name of Dr. King, which I don't think is consistent with his philosophy. The issue of the bridge on Dr. King's day was one in which Giuliani was clearly wrong. It's just no question about it. And then for Giuliani to, at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, talk about the fact that Dr. King was a peaceful person, you see, and all of that was just it was a defamation of Dr. King.
Yes, it was.
Because you see, first of all, Dr. King did not believe that you should challenge unjust laws. He believed that you should break unjust laws.
Exactly. Yeah.
You see, which meant that Dr. King was a person who believed in breaching the peace. Because you see, underlying every element of criminal law, whether it's murder, robbery, larceny, or whatever, is the element of breach of the peace. That's the whole essence of why criminal law exists in the first place.
Hold this point. For those of you who are standing by on hold, and I know that we got you standing by, please be patient. Your calls are absolutely next. As you hear, it's a deep discussion. More to come, and your telephone calls will be our first priority when we return. Inside of the GBE Radio Magazine, understanding our power under the law, all the aspects of it. In this morning's GBE Radio Magazine, coming up next, J.J.R. Ramey and the latest in news. J.J.? And as you look at Dr. King and as you listen to his speeches, I've said, if people in the movement, the today's movement, actually listen to Dr. King, they would realize that they have punked out.
You better believe it.
So bad.
What? You better believe it.
Okay, they have punked out so bad, they have no idea. Because what he's saying,
right.
and I realized at
right.
one point,
right.
when he's coming to town,
right.
and the sheriff,
right.
and the mayor,
right.
and all of them know, he's gonna break the law.
Right. Yeah. You know what I mean?
He's coming in defiance of the law,
right.
and coming to break it.
The law. Right.
That's a whole different thing.
Not to challenge the law.
No.
But to break the law.
Absolutely. And you're right.
You know what I mean? This is why I'm in town, to break the law.
Absolutely. And I'm coming on such and such a day.
To do it. Right.
Exactly.
Right. You know what I mean?
No, that's different.
I mean,
that's real.
I mean, that's real.
Yeah, man, it's real.
And that's deep.
Yeah, it's deep. Yeah, it's deep. It's deep. And it's odd because we have this real dichotomy. And I'm coming on such and such a day.
To do it. Right.
Exactly.
Right. You know what I mean?
No, that's no, he's gonna break the law.
Right. Yeah. You know what I mean?
He's coming in defiance of the law.
Right.
And coming to break
the
it.
law. Right.
That's a whole different thing.
Not to challenge the law.
No.
But to break the law.
Absolutely. And you're right.
You know what I mean? This is why I'm in town, to break the law.
Absolutely. And I'm coming on such and such a day.
To do it. Right.
Exactly.
Right. You know what I mean?
No, that's different.
I mean,
that's real.
I mean, that's real.
Yeah, man, it's real.
And that's deep.
Yeah, it's deep. Yeah, it's deep. It's deep. And it's odd because we have this real dichotomy of people who benefited from the laws that were adjusted, changed, and broken, who actually look on activists now and get angry at them if they break the law.
Right. Yeah, that's it. That's that's the whole point.
Man.
Right. See, that's why I said I had to say this. You know what I mean?
Brother,
because I started hearing that, man, we don't even understand the philosophy of this man.
Yeah.
See, we're not into the philosophy of people.
Yeah.
That's what's killing us.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely.
You know, and that's a deep study. You see, because you see, Imhotep, you could just sit here for a whole year studying Dr. King.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree totally.
I mean, it's so deep. You know what I mean?
Deep. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
In the last 2 months of his life, Dr. King faced the idea that civil rights alone could not solve the problem of poverty.
In Mississippi today.
He roamed the South, trying to gain support for Poor People's Campaign. Its goals: full employment, a guaranteed income, and decent housing for every American.
People just don't know, but it's really hard. Not only me, it's so many more in the same shape. I'm not the only one. It's just so many of us right around. It's just no have shoes, clothes. They're naked and hungry. Part time you have to cook your pinto beans morning, down, and supper. They don't know where else get a good meal.
You all are really to be admired. And I want you to know that you have my moral support. I'm going to be praying for you. I'm going to be coming back to see you. And we are going to be demanding, when we go to Washington, that something be done, and done immediately, about these conditions.
This was a different Martin Luther King. Just weeks before his murder, in tones suggestive of the Black Panthers, he began to talk about how the government had broken its promise to the newly freed slaves just after the Civil War.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. Now, this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
Joining us right now, Attorney Alton Maddox, attorney at War Alton Maddox, on our theme, Understanding Our Power Under the Law, a tribute to a king. I see all of you standing by. I am not blind. I'm coming right to you immediately, and thank you for being so patient and for holding on. Thanks for being with us. You're in the GBE with Attorney Alton Maddox. Good afternoon. Yes, peace.
How you doing, Brother Alton?
Yes, sir. How you doing?
I met you once before. Brother Ronnie sent me before his death.
Oh, okay.
To see you. You're absolutely right. I presently got a case at Eastern District Court, and I'm doing this case pro bono because I'm having a hard time getting an attorney to go against this big company, R&Y Management.
You mean pro se?
Pro se, yes.
Right.
So now,
I don't want you to be charged with practice by a license.
Now, I got to the court now. The judge, I presented evidence. I was fined while I was out on disability. I had surgery on my knee. They owe me almost $60,000 in lost wages. The arbitration, the judge told him they better settle this case because get me to not proceed with the case. But she tells their lawyer to put in a summary judgment. Now, I know how to come back with the dispute in fact after that, but the fact is that she told him that they can't win the case. So I go to arbitration and they offer me $1,200. Now, this is how they look at it. $60,000 in lost wages, and besides that, I'm suing for $5 million punitive damages because they searched me for a gun on my job, which is a violation of my 13th and 14th Amendment. Now, I wrecked them because I put in a discovery motion, and I haven't received it. I go to court this Friday, and I can't get a black attorney to handle this case for nothing.
Well, let's just sort of go back for one moment now. The case is in federal court.
Yes, I go back to 26. She told them to get Mr. Goodette not to proceed with this case. My advice to you is to get Mr. Goodette not to proceed with this case.
Let me just ask you some specific questions real quick. What do you know the jurisdictional basis for which you brought this lawsuit?
I'm suing for $5 million punitive damages because I was fired off my job while I was out on disability. He had doctor's notes. I showed all the verification. I had surgery on my knee.
Brother, hold on. Keep your answers as concise as possible so Attorney Maddox can give you some responses.
So what I'm trying to get at this, is there a specific statute? I mean, like, for example, are you suing on some specific labor law? Are you pursuing under a civil rights statute?
Under civil rights.
You're suing a private employer?
Yes, R&Y Match. It's a big company. Nobody wants to fight this.
Okay.
Brother, hold on. Don't extend the answers.
Okay,
Let him respond because there's specific points that you're tapping that Alton is going to deal with.
Okay. Now the next thing is that at some point this judge suggested to your adversary that a motion for summary judgment. Now, did your adversary make that motion?
He has. I go Friday. They haven't put it in because I put in a motion to discovery because I found out that was my right.
Okay.
Discovery motions, and I presented to the judge.
Brother, let him respond.
Okay. All right. So now you have a pretrial conference on Friday.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you have put in certain discovery. Now, if I may ask, is that in the nature of interrogatories, or is it in the nature of a deposition? Or
questions, verbal and written questions.
All right. So you have already served those on your adversary?
Yes, and it has been delivered to the judge's chamber.
Okay. And you haven't received an answer from those yet?
No, sir.
All right. Now, what is your fear now?
When I get back to court, that they're going to try. I don't know. I know that she told him to put in a summary judgment when she should have told me, being that I have all the evidence. You understand? So that she was still trying to help them. At the same time, she's telling me telling him to get me not to proceed with this case.
No, I understand. No, brother, I understand everything that, one of the things about, it's like being a bloodhound, you know what I mean? You sort of get a scent and you see all the scenario. That's the reason why, I'm just asking you to be patient and let me pick up, because I see all of this. I've tried too many cases not to have seen it, But my point, though, is this. A motion for summary judgment, in essence, means that there's no genuine issues of fact, that there are only legal questions that have to be resolved, and therefore there's no need for a trial, because all law questions can be decided by a judge. That's essentially what a motion for summary judgment is. Now, also, a motion for summary judgment is something that usually happens in all civil lawsuits at some point or another. All right, it's something that usually happens. I cannot say the mere fact that she suggested to him that he should make a motion for summary judgment as to what the outcome of the case is going to be, because generally that would be a motion that normally a lawyer would make anyway, and sometimes it might be that the judge is trying to get this case moving a lot faster so that the motion be made earlier than later. However, in light of your discovery, where you have a right to conduct discovery, then you may be able to define facts that will clearly show that not only are there legal questions here, or that there are also factual questions. Or on the other hand, you may want to say that there's no factual question, that it is all matter of law, and the law is in your favor. So that's really where you are at this particular time.
What about the amount that he mentioned? Did you mention $1,200, brother?
No, they owe me $63,000 in lost wages. Since
I heard you say that, but where did the $1,200 come in?
That's what they offered me at an arbitration with my union.
That's what I'm asking you.
Yeah,
So
the judge made them do that. They said that they had to offer me a settlement for $1,200. He wanted me to forget about my job and just go away.
I understand.
My suit for $1,200.
I understand. So, Attorney Maddox, what would your overall recommendation be to someone in this situation?
Well, my overall recommendation, obviously, is that, Friday just seems to be a conference date because there's outstanding discovery.
Yes.
I don't know what's going to happen beyond that because, the case cannot be disposed of unless there is some motion, like a motion to dismiss failure to state a cause of action, or a motion to dismiss on the grounds of summary judgment, or go to trial itself. So neither one of these things are happening. So right now it seems as though that he just simply engaged in discovery. And
the actual thing that I presented, I went to the precinct to have this guy that searched me on my job, who's a retired police officer. I also filed for sexual harassment because they touched my private parts during the search in public while I was in a security uniform.
What about that aspect of his case?
The other point, though, is the question of whether that is part of his complaint. I mean, has he? Well, then he certainly is entitled to conduct discovery on that. I mean, that's why he's in court in the first place.
I have the police precinct with a complaint number, and I presented that also to the judge.
But see what I think is happening though is, one, obviously when you go into court and you're not represented by counsel, your fears are elevated, and his fears may be very much warranted, But I think that it really boils down to him actually sitting down with an attorney.
I've been trying, my brother. They still a first state lawyer.
It happens in hotel. You can't sit down with anybody in 2 minutes
and just knock it out like that.
Knock it out. See, that doesn't happen that way.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of different issues. Everybody got a side.
Sure.
And therefore, and as we said before, we're not dealing here with what's right and wrong. We're dealing with rights and duties. You see, that's why I was even asking him what statutes was he suing under. Because only then do you really know what your particular rights are, not whether he was right in searching your privates. Because that's not the issue. The issue is what are your rights and what are your obligations. Point blank. That's a whole different ball game, you see. And so we get mixed up because we say, well, hey man, it wasn't right for him to search me, it wasn't right for him to touch my private parts. But that ain't what the law is about. It ain't about right or wrong. It ain't about good or bad. You know what I mean? Because you see, the Europeans do not believe in moral reasoning. You see, they are very, they do not believe that they can operate a system based on morals because they don't believe they can reason for morals.
Okay.
And
so if you don't go in, for example, knowing what statute actually this particular issue should be filed under,
right?
The fact that it was wrong doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
You see, because it's not.
And
based
if you file
on
under the wrong statute,
right,
it's
even worse because now you're out of there.
Got
you see what I'm saying? And the statute of limitations may kill you down the line. And that's what we have to always remember. When you go in their system, you got to be very much aware that it's totally contrary to the nature of us as a people. See, because we are into goodness and badness.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we're dealing with people who got a whole different nature, a whole different culture, a whole different philosophy.